Chapter 92. The Christines at a feast in Lazarus' home. A fire rages in the town. Jesus rescues a child from the flames and stays the fire by the word. He gives a practical lesson on how to redeem a drunken man. Now, Lazarus was at the feast, and Jesus and the 12 went with him to his home in Bethany. And Lazarus and his sisters made a feast for Jesus and the 12. And Ruth and Asher came from Jericho, for Asher was no longer hostile towards the Christ. And while the guests sat at the board, behold a cry, "The village is afire!" And all rushed out into the streets, and lo, the homes of many neighbors were in flames. And in an upper room an infant lay asleep, and none could pass the flames to save. The mother, wild with grief, was calling on the men to save her child. Then, with a voice that made the spirits of the fire pale and tremble, Jesus said, "Peace, peace, be still." And then he walked through smoke and flame, climbed up the falling stair, and in a moment came again, and in his arms he brought the child. And not a trace of fire was on himself, his raiment, or the child. Then Jesus raised his hand, rebuked the spirits of the fire, commanding them to cease their awful work and be at rest. And then, as though the waters of the sea were all at once poured on the flames, the fire ceased to burn. And when the fury of the fire was spent, the multitudes were wild to see the man who could control the fire. And Jesus said, "Man was not made for fire, but fire was made for man. Man was not made for fire, but fire was made for man. When man comes to himself and comprehends the fact that he is Son of God, and knows that in himself lies all the powers of God, he is a mastermind, and all the elements will hear his voice and gladly do his will. Two sturdy asses bind the will of man. Their names are fear and unbelief. When these are caught and turned aside, the will of man will know no bounds. Then man has but to speak, and it is done. And then the guests returned and sat about the board. A little child came in and stood by Jesus' side. She laid her hand on Jesus' arm and said, "Please, Master Jesus, here, my father is a drunken man. My mother toils from morn till night, and when she brings her wages home, my father snatches them away and squanders every cent for drink, and mother and us little ones are hungry all the night. Please, Master Jesus, come with me and touch my father's heart. He is so good and kind when he is just himself. I know it is the wine that makes another man of him." And Jesus went out with the child. He found the wretched home. He spoke in kindness to the mother and the little ones, and then upon a bed of straw he found the drunken man. He took him by the hand and raised him up and said, "My brother, man, made in the image of our Father God, will you arise and come with me? Your neighbors are in sore distress. They have lost all they had in this fierce fire, and men must build their homes again, and you and I must lead the way." And then the man arose. The two went arm in arm to view the wrecks. They heard the mothers and the children crying in the streets. They saw their wretchedness. And Jesus said, "My friend, here is a work for you to do. Just lead the way in helpfulness. I'm sure the men of Bethany will furnish you the means and help." The spark of hope that had so long been smouldering in the man was fanned into a flame. He threw his ragged coat aside. He was himself again. And then he called for help, not for himself, but for the homeless ones, and everybody helped. The ruined homes were built again. And then he saw his own poor den. His heart was stirred into its depths. The pride of manhood filled his soul. He said, "This wretched den shall be a home." He worked as he had never wrought before, and everybody helped. and in a little while the den became a home indeed. The flowers of love bloomed everywhere. The mother and the little ones were filled with joy. The father never drank again. A man was saved, and no one ever said a word about neglect or drunkenness, nor urged him to reform.